From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. We're going to start today with the coronavirus, something that the Fed said presents a, quote, new risk for U.S. economic outlook. They put that in their semi-annual report to Congress released just over an hour ago right now. We turn now to our colleague, Sophie Kamarudin. She is reporting from Hong Kong. Give us the latest, Sophie. How big a risk is this for the economy?
While the Fed did note that downside risks to the U.S. economy have eased, it just became the latest central bank to flag the potential spillover effect of the coronavirus outbreak on the U.S. economy as well as the global picture. This in light of the sheer size of China's economy. In 2020, China's GDP is set to account for 17% of global GDP. And with China's growth seen slowing this quarter, we've seen several economists lower their forecasts for the U.S. in tandem, with several industries remaining affected, trade also being hampered, and commodity prices taking a hit as well. And day by day, we're seeing that fallout on companies becoming more apparent, David. And this picture has raised concerns about whether or not China can fulfill the terms of the Phase 1 trade deal. But President Xi Jinping, in a call with President Trump, reaffirmed commitment there. This after China cut tariffs on some $75 billion of American imports, David.
Yeah, which was very well received here. But before we can know what effect it has on the economy, we have to know how big it is, don't we? And I must say, just from our experience here in the United States right now, it seems like the level of confidence in the numbers coming out of China, if anything, is going down, not up. Do we know how many people are infected? How many people have died?
When it comes to the official tally, confirmed cases on the mainland have surpassed 31,000, and the death toll stands at 636 people. But it is worthwhile noting that the number of new cases on the mainland, those have declined for a second day. Yet we are seeing containment efforts being ramped up across several cities in China, including Chengdu and Shenzhen. And Foxconn, a major Apple supplier, has told workers not to return to its Shenzhen facilities on Monday, given what we're seeing across the region. And as for Hubei, the epicenter of this outbreak, hospitals there are facing staff shortages as the province deals with the lion's share of these confirmed cases, David.
Okay, Sophie, thank you for your continued terrific reporting from Hong Kong. That's our colleague, Sophie Kamarudin, over there in Hong Kong. And now let's check in on the markets and figure out how they're reacting to today's stories. Joining us is Abigail Doolittle. So it's attempting to blame it all on coronavirus. We are off somewhat in equities. Bonds are somewhat up. What's going on?
It probably is mainly coronavirus and the fears that perhaps not everything is priced in. Because, of course, this week we've had this big rally, the best week since June after last week, the worst week since August. All of this last week on coronavirus fears and what the impact could be on the global economy. This week, investors wanting in, comparing the coronavirus to SARS and to other outbreaks. The fact is, though, it's just simply too early to know that it truly is SARS. And we have this cruise operator stuck off the coast of Japan, and the current count right now, 61 have contracted the coronavirus. There's some speculation that the Chinese government isn't giving us the true numbers. So the tragic side of this, of course, is people are sick and they're dying. But this could give us the true number in terms of what the mortality rate truly is.
Yeah, exactly. We hear different numbers. Initially, we heard it was quite low, much lower than SARS, for example. But at the same time, we hear, for example, in Wuhan, the central point, there was a report this morning I saw in the New York Times of over 4%.
In terms of the mortality rate.
Exactly.
So if that could continue to rise, because there's lots of not record reports, but smaller outlets reports speaking of even higher than that. So there seems to be lots of speculation in terms of, as folks try to get their hands on, in terms of how many people are actually infected there in Wuhan. Some numbers much higher than the 31,000, and then also that mortality rate. So this cruise operator could really give us I want to say, a clean look at what that could actually turn out to be for sure. And markets, we're always talking about how stocks, at the end of the day, it's not headline risk. We can recover from that. But the profit outlook and the impact, right now we're seeing lots of companies having to shutter stores, and it's really eating into sales and earnings. If that continues, that could really be a problem for stocks.
Okay, Abigail, thank you so much for joining us today on those markets. And now we're going to turn to the Democratic race for president and the first primary of the election year being held in New Hampshire just 4 days from right now. Welcome now, Sean Golhar. He's Barclays head of public policy research. Welcome, Sean. Good to see you. I know you have a note on this, but we were all hoping for at least less uncertainty as we got past Iowa. I'm not sure we got that.
No, absolutely not. It feels a little like 2000 with hanging chads all over again. But we don't have a clear winner. But like I wrote in a note at Barclays Research, we did think it's going to be, you're going to have several people near the top of the ticket. You could have the situation where 4 people actually got over 15% of the vote statewide. As I understand it, that might be the first time in history in a primary or caucus you had that situation. And given the way Democrats allocate delegates proportionally, the top 2 folks, Senator Sanders and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, it looks like we'll have the same number of delegates coming out of Iowa.
Yeah, at the same time, let's be clear, it's about 1% of the delegates are out of Iowa. So it's not so much the delegates.
41 out of nearly 4,000 pledged.
It's more the momentum question and what this does to of a Joe Biden who clearly underperformed where they hoped him to be, or a Pete Buttigieg who some would say overperformed.
No, absolutely. And I think if you look at the numbers of projected vote share to what they actually came out of it, you're absolutely right in terms of seeing those surprises. But I still think South Carolina at the end of the month will be very important. Demographically, it's a very diverse state. It looks more like the national electorate for the Democratic Party. There's a lot more delegates at hand, and that'll give us an indication going to Super Tuesday how the race looks.
Well, and even South Carolina, when you look at that, Joe Biden has been ahead there in the polling thus far as well. But Tom Steyer, who did not do particularly well in Iowa, is not polling particularly strongly in New Hampshire either, is really doing quite well right now, and even in Nevada. So that might indicate, we're not getting a lot of clarity anytime soon.
Right. We've been saying at Barclays Research, this nomination process is wide open. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns. So seeing how this process will play out, we have to get a few more data points, and I think clearly South Carolina will be important, but also Super Tuesday in March. 35% of the pledged delegates are awarded that day. Only 4% come in these early states, so we're going to see a lot more at play.
The ultimate question for your clients and for our audience is who's going to be president, what will their policies be? As a practical matter, we just saw President Trump in the State of the Union really lay out his election claim, and particularly important on the economy and how well he's done. Can any of these candidates at this point really take on President Trump? Yeah,
there's some head-to-head polling right now, and I think it's really early to look at that, and it is quite competitive in some of the important states, Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, but I think it is a little early. I mean, for President Trump, I think the tweets are going to write themselves right now, and he's definitely enjoying this moment.
At the same time, it does appear in the Democratic race that it is sort of clarifying between a couple of different positions. With a couple of candidates for each of the positions, there's a moderate position that is associated with Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden, the former vice president. And there's a more progressive, I think it's fair to say, Sanders-Warren one. And those would have different effects if those became law, if they were actually enacted.
No, absolutely. And I think for the markets and clients, both institutional investors and corporates around the world, that is a big concern. There's also a third option. We don't get an official nominee at the time of the last primary in mid-June. But from mid-June to mid-July then, when the convention is, you would see a lot of horse trading. And it's possible candidates could pair up with each other to talk about a president, vice president ticket. It's a long time till then. But I think right now we're thinking those are the 3 main scenarios.
It's that mythical brokered convention we talk about every 4 years and never quite happens. But maybe this year, who knows? It actually could be possible.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. Sean Golhar, he's Barclays Head of Public Policy Research. And we turn now to Mark Crumpton because he's here with Bloomberg First Word News.
David, more fallout from the coronavirus outbreak. The company that builds iPhones for Apple, Hon Hai, is keeping one of its most important Chinese factories closed. It's told workers not to show up when the Lunar New Year holiday ends Monday. Meantime, Japan found another 41 cases of the virus on the cruise ship quarantined off Yokohama. 20 cases were previously disclosed. The death toll in China has now risen to at least 636. There are more than 31,000 confirmed cases of the coronavirus. The outbreak of the virus will not stop China from meeting its purchase goals outlined in the recent trade deal with the United States. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow tells Bloomberg that Chinese President Xi Jinping told President Trump by phone that Beijing will keep up its end of the deal.
President Xi apparently reassured President Trump in this phone call that while there might be some delays in the purchase of American exports, the markers of $200 billion over the next couple of years will, in fact, be met.
Mr. Kudlow says China hasn't formally asked for exceptions to the purchasing targets, but the 2 leaders and staff are talking. President Trump's been handed a victory against a lawsuit by 215 congressional Democrats who say he violated the Constitution's emoluments clause. The suit accused the president of profiting from foreign government spending at his Washington hotel and other properties. A federal appeals court in Washington dismissed the case today, saying members of the House and Senate lack standing to sue the president. Turkey is sending more troops, armored vehicles, and tanks into rebel-controlled northwestern Syria. The Syrian government, backed by its ally Russia, has kept up a military offensive in Idlib province. President Bashar al-Assad's forces have seized dozens of rebel-held towns and villages in the past 2 months, displacing hundreds of people. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks very much, Mark. Coming up, U.S. jobs numbers out this morning, surprise to the upside. We take a closer look at just how good that news really is with our economic panel of Diane Swonk of Grant Thornton and David Wilcox of the Peterson Institute. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. U.S. employers ramped up hiring in January and wage gains rebounded. But the Federal Reserve Board warns that the coronavirus outbreak presents a new risk to the U.S. economic outlook in the United States and, for that matter, in global markets. For more, we welcome now our panel of David Wilcox. He's non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute of International Economics. Dr. Wilcox served as the director of the Fed's Division of Research and Statistics. He comes to us from Washington. And then from Chicago, we have Diane Swonk. She is chief economist at Grant Thornton. So, Diane, let's start with you. I will confess I cheated. I took a peek at your note. It has to do, in part, with the weather, what we saw in the jobs numbers. Is that right?
We had unusually mild winter weather, which helped already some strong sector in residential construction, but boosted that even more. We also got non-residential specialty construction up by quite a bit. Actually, the unseasonally adjusted numbers fell during the month. So after that seasonal adjustment, they just didn't fall as much as usual. So they look like an increase. We also saw some transportation sector increases, and at the local level, some hiring to extend those repairs out there, filled in potholes while the weather was still good. All of that helped to boost these numbers, but even stripping that out, there's still pretty solid gains. We're still above the level we need to, over time, bring the unemployment rate down.
So, David, there are always variations, ups and downs in various things. Is there anything in these numbers that gives you pause about the strength of the U.S. economy that might be slowing down?
No, Diane's right that this was a good, solid report, even adjusting for the weather effects that she rightly points to. I think, for me, the sort of headline observation is that the Federal Reserve just has to be looking at this report with a lot of satisfaction. It took a reasonably big bet on being able to run the economy a little hotter and for longer than anybody expected to be possible. And that bet, based on today's report, was validated in a big way.
So, Diane, how does that express itself? I mean, if you're an employer, if you're a CEO of a company, what is it from the, trace me from the Fed and cutting its rates to I'm going to employ more people?
Well, the bottom line is that, we've seen the service sector really be pretty immune. The manufacturing sector was still weak with the decline, particularly in auto employment. And the manufacturing sector did slip into a recession last year, showed some signs in the ISM numbers of coming back, but not in employment yet. And that's going to get another blow from the coronavirus. But what was good about this number is how sustained we've seen growth in the service sector. And basically, the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates, you saw it come out exactly where you'd expect it to see it in the housing market and construction activity. We've seen some of the first positives for 2 quarters in a row in housing market activity that we'd seen in almost 2 years. That's very important, and that was directly tied to the Federal Reserve's efforts to back off the rate hikes they had done in 2018 and take back 3/4 of them in 2019. The thing we're still not seeing is more of acceleration in wage growth. We're kind of surprised that we're seeing 3%. That's great, 3.1%. That's all good news, but it's not as much as we would expect given how low the unemployment rate has fallen.
Well, exactly. We have this dilemma that's been going on for some time as the Fed tries to puzzle through that. And, David, you may have thoughts on that. But in addition to the question of wage growth, there's also the question of capital investment, which spiked up a bit under President Trump, but then came back down. If, in fact, we have more people working more and making more money, that might indicate to CEOs they should invest more to increase capacity. Why are they not doing that?
Well, let me first focus on the wage situation. Normally, if employers are looking to hang out the help wanted sign, the first thing they'll do is boost compensation. And that really is the acid test of whether the labor market is running hot. And we just see no evidence of that whatsoever. There are a bunch of different indicators of compensation growth. 2 out of 3 of those indicators that are most closely watched just have shown either no acceleration or even a little backtracking on the growth of hourly pay. So this has to send a strong message to the Fed that the 3 rate cuts that it put in place last summer are looking awfully good at this point.
Interesting. And Diane, as a practical matter, do we have any prospect of inflation? Because that really is what's encouraging, I think, the Fed, that they don't see any of that yet.
No, we haven't seen any yet, and they certainly have missed their target ever since they set their target, so that's a problem. And the question is this year, when they hit the reset on the new policy framework, will they have an average inflation time frame out there, something to give us more sense of how much they're willing to do catch-up policies and how hot they're really willing to overshoot on inflation if we can actually get it up there in the first place. And I think that's something that's very important this year. The Fed is counting on the fact that we get easier year-over-year comps in inflation going forward to make the inflation numbers look a little more solid, but it still is very fluid, especially with the blow to commodity prices tied to the coronavirus and the blow to China's economy, which is one of the biggest commodity consumers out there. So this is a tough environment for the Fed. It's good that they've done the cuts and they feel they've got a tailwind. It's not just the Fed. The Federal Reserve opened the door to almost 50 central banks cutting rates a collective of over 70 times simultaneously in 2019, which has given us a bit of a tailwind and a cushion against the blow from the coronavirus and any other shocks that we may see as we move into 2020.
Diane, why aren't we seeing the participation rate move up more? It has moved up some, but it's still, for example, if you compare it with other countries around the world, it isn't up the same level of that. Why aren't they? If we've got that tight a job market, why isn't it getting the participation rate up?
Well, the good news is that it's moved up, and that white men and Hispanic men are finally coming back after not being as much involved in the picture. Much of the movement up in recent years has been because women joining the labor force and coming back up to their previous highs of the 1990s. But men are still lagging the 90s boom by quite a bit. And we really lost that decade going into the Great Recession from 2000 to 2008. We lost a lot of ground. We know there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the most notable one is, everything from the trade situation to globalization to technological innovation, all of that suppressed participation. But also we saw the opioid crisis, we saw increased suicides, we saw increased deaths from alcohol-related illness. All of those things combined, the rural-urban divide, those things were still challenging. The good news is it looks like we're finally beginning to tap some of those people, and that's why we have more room to run. The Fed had underestimated the ability to pull those people in from the sidelines in what's become a marathon of an expansion out there. And I think their goal now is to sustain it. I think in order to get a little more adrenaline, a little more heat this year, they should cut again mid-year to keep the adrenaline going and on what has become a marathon and an expansion and get a little more heat.
David Wilcox, we got that semi-annual report from the Fed to the Congress at about 11 o'clock this morning Eastern time. And as I said, one of the things the Fed said is the coronavirus could pose a real risk to the U.S. economy. If, in fact, that risk becomes reality, in fact, that there's some real suppression of the U.S. economy, what kind of tools does the Fed have, given how low the interest rates are already? Do they really have the tools to address that particular problem?
The Fed really has one tool in its repertoire, and that is to ease the stance of monetary policy. Obviously, it can't target that policy tool toward a specific cause any more if it's coronavirus than if it's trade disruption or weather effects or anything else going on in the economy. So it's got kind of one trick in its bag. I think it remains to be seen whether the effect from the coronavirus will be serious enough. Right now, it's just in the realm of a great big unknown.
Okay, thank you so very much to David Wilcox of the Peterson Institute in Washington and Diane Swonk of Grant Thornton. She's the chief economist there. Still ahead, we're going to speak with Democratic presidential candidate Tom Steyer. He's in Manchester, New Hampshire for tonight's debate and the New Hampshire primary. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Since President Trump took office, there have been questions raised about his making money off of his Washington hotel and whether that just might violate the emoluments clauses of the U.S. Constitution. 215 members of Congress sued the president in federal court over that question. And earlier today, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit dismissed the suit, saying they lacked standing. Joining us now is June Grasso. She is the host of Bloomberg Law, airing every day on Bloomberg Radio. Welcome, June. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
So 215 members of Congress, that sounds like a lot, and yet the court didn't take much time and effort to say, no, I'm sorry, you can't come.
No, and this is on a technical issue of standing. No court has gotten to the issue of the emoluments clause. It's a novel question because, let's face it, before President Trump, I think the only time you heard about the emoluments clause was in a law school class somewhere.
That's right.
So this court said, look, there are only 250 members of Congress here. That's not even a majority of Congress. So they would have no say about emoluments anyway. So they don't have standing. I thought what was interesting, though, is they said, in a case like this, we want to be especially rigorous. That's apparently a new standard of law, David. Especially rigorous, because if we had to decide this case, we'd be deciding what one branch of government is doing, whether it's constitutional as opposed to another.
Yeah, and the judges may end up being the subject of President Trump for an hour or so in the East Wing, of the White House. But it was interesting what they basically said. This is a debate within Congress, and they specifically said we are not going to, we will not, indeed we cannot participate in this debate. They're basically saying we're not getting
right.
This.
And they talked about a 1994, I think, Supreme Court decision where 6 members of Congress were challenging the constitutionality of the Line Item Veto Act, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You don't have standing, which is that technical.
So this still could go up to the Supreme Court, although, as I say, it's a per curiam decision. It was unanimous. It was not just Republican appointees. This is not the only case he's got, though. He's not done.
These are the cases that I have a graph about on my desk because I'm trying to figure out. There are 3 cases. This D.C. case, there's a Virginia case, there's a case in New York. In Virginia, the panel rejected the AGs of Maryland and Washington, and they said that the case couldn't go forward. Excuse me. But then it went to an en banc panel, the full court, and we're waiting for that decision. But at the Second Circuit is allowing the case there, which involves restaurants and hotels, to go forward. So
that's all separate from the questions of the criminal investigation into his charity up here in New York. He's got a lot more lawsuits.
Well, there's also the Supreme Court tax cases. That's going to be coming up.
Exactly right.
That's going to be a big issue.
They'll get to this one way or the other.
Absolutely.
Exactly. We've got a long way, a lot more things to talk about, June.
I know, but let's just hope it's not talked about in one of his discourses, because you don't want to hear about that when judges are involved.
Wouldn't rule that out necessarily. Okay, many thanks now to Bloomberg's June Grasso. She is the host of Bloomberg Law. That airs weeknights at 10 p.m. and at 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Saturday as well. Up next, Tom Steyer. He gives the latest on his presidential campaign and previews tonight's debate. We're going to ask Mr. Steyer exactly what he plans to say and how he's doing in New Hampshire, as well as the other states coming up. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. From New York, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, Democratic presidential hopefuls Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders will meet face-to-face on the debate stage tonight in Manchester, New Hampshire. Their virtual tie in the Iowa caucuses sets them up as the co-frontrunners in the all-important delegate race. Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren are likely to go on the offensive after disappointing performances in Iowa. In New Jersey, health officials boarded a cruise ship and screened more than 24 passengers who recently traveled from China. They were looking for symptoms of the coronavirus. 23 of the passengers were cleared. The other 4 are being evaluated at a hospital. The temporary transatlantic trade truce may come under pressure later this month if the United States follows through on a plan to increase its tariff paying on the European Union. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer is threatening to deploy a trade tactic called carousel retaliation, whereby a country periodically shifts tariffs on different groups of goods. There's going to be some leadership changes at the International Monetary Fund. The IMF says top deputy David Lipton will leave at the end of the month. Lipton's departure is part of a shakeup of the leadership team by Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, who took office in October. IMF Chief Administrative Officer Carla Grasso is also leaving the fund. That will give President Trump a chance to install an ally at the top of the institution. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks very much, Mark. Whatever happened or didn't happen in Iowa, the Democratic candidates for president are on to New Hampshire with a debate tonight at St. Anselm's College up there and 4 days ahead of the New Hampshire primary. We welcome now one of those candidates, Tom Steyer. He's founder of Farallon Capital and of NextGen, a nonprofit organization supporting progressive positions on issues such as the climate, immigration, and healthcare. He comes to us today from Manchester, New Hampshire. So, Tom, thank you so very much for joining us. Give us a sense of what really did happen in Iowa and how does it affect what's going on in New Hampshire, if at all?
Look, it's still a little bit unclear what happens in Iowa, David. I think what's going on is that people have just moved on, that, in fact, that kind of got swallowed up. There's a debate tonight in New Hampshire, as you said, at St. Anselm's College, where people are going to get a chance. But I think something's really changed in this race, David, and it had something to do with the debacle in Iowa, but I think it's much broader than that. I think what happened this week is that everybody in the Democratic Party realized, oh my goodness, Donald Trump can get reelected, and that whoever is going to be the Democratic nominee is going to have to beat Donald Trump. And that every policy discussion, as important as those policy discussions are between the different health care plans, between the different Green New Deals, between education plans and plans to revive a living wage, the question is this: if we can't beat Donald Trump, aren't all of those policy discussions moot? And if we're going to beat Donald Trump, we're going to have somebody who can take him on the economy, because he keeps talking about how good he is on the economy. And the Democratic candidate is going to have to show that Mr. Trump's a liar, that he was a fake businessman, that he failed as a business person, and that he's actually lying about the American economy. If that doesn't happen, Donald Trump can get reelected. And I have 30 years building a business that could not have succeeded if I didn't understand how to create jobs, how to create growth and prosperity. Look, this isn't a couple years at McKinsey. This is a 30-year history where I was absolutely dependent on being able to answer that. And I can take Donald Trump down on the debate stage because he's a fake, and I can show it.
And I want to come back to what President Trump said at that State of the Union address about the economy, because what you're saying is not that dissimilar from what the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said. But first, in order to beat Donald Trump, you have to get people to turn out to vote. Are you concerned that the voter turnout in Iowa was lower than what people thought it would be? It was actually lower than 2008. It was on line, I think, with 2016. Does that bother you? You don't have the passion from the voters?
David, there's no question in my mind that whoever the Democratic candidate is going to be, if he or she intends to beat Donald Trump, it's going to be dependent on a good turnout from the diverse Democratic Party. If we don't have that, we cannot beat him. And whoever is going to be the candidate has to be able to attract that diverse turnout, because we're a diverse party, thank God. But we have to have the Black community supporting us, the Latino community supporting us, the Asian American community, the AAPI community supporting us. We need turnout. And whoever is going to be the candidate has got to appeal across the spectrum. If you look at South Carolina, I'm doing it with the Black community there. You can look at the numbers. I was at 25% in a poll yesterday in the Black community. If you look at Nevada, I'm doing it with the Latino community. I have a long history with those communities. If you want to beat Donald Trump as a Democratic candidate, you've got to be able to pull together that diverse coalition, and you've got to ask, can the people who are running do it?
Well, Tom, I'm glad you raised that, because I was going to ask you about specifically South Carolina and Nevada, where you are doing much better than you did in Iowa, or it appears you're doing in New Hampshire. Why is it? What is the appeal that you think you have, or perhaps more important, the things you're saying has to the African Americans in South Carolina and the Hispanics in Nevada?
It's not just what I'm saying, David. It's what I've done for the last 35 years. We've been working to support immigrants to this country for 35 years without asking about papers. My wife and I started a bank that's dedicated to the idea of supporting businesses owned by women, Black people, and Latinos. That's 15 years ago. That's not me making something up. That bank's gone from zero to over $1 billion. I don't have to claim that I work on racial justice issues. I talk about race. I'm for reparations. Sure, that's different from everybody else who's running. But it's also a long-term commitment to racial justice, a willingness to talk about it. I'm a big climate bug, right? You know that.
Yep.
But I talk about climate in terms of black and brown communities, that you start in the places where America concentrates its poison. Those tend to be African American and Latino communities where it's unsafe to breathe or to drink the water that comes out of the tap. You start in those communities, you solve climate. I'm saying there's a racial element to virtually every policy area. It's true, most people won't talk about it. I don't only talk about it, I'll talk about what we need to do to repair it and to move forward together.
Tom, let me come back to what you said about needing to beat President Trump on the economy, and you said that the president doesn't always tell the truth. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, said something like that about the State of the Union address. Go back to that State of the Union address. The president said an awful lot about the economy, about good things going in the economy. You and I both know some of that is true. The economy is doing well. Employment is up. How do you really respond to President Trump? He has a very big megaphone. What he says is not inaccurate. Sometimes he picks and chooses what years he's reporting on, but how do you respond to that as a practical matter? Nancy Pelosi tore up the speech. What's your equivalent to that?
David, this is a Mar-a-Lago economy. If you play 18 at Mar-a-Lago and repair to the bar afterwards for 2 or 3 martinis, this is your kind of economy. All the money's going to the rich people. There's low unemployment, but you can't live on the jobs this economy produces. The growth is all going to the rich people. So in fact, the stock market goes up because of big tax breaks for big corporations. Did you see Amazon is paying a 1% tax? The company owned by the richest man in the world is paying a 1% tax? That's outrageous, and it's typical Mar-a-Lago behavior, as a matter of fact. What we're seeing is an economy where the stock market goes up and it helps rich people, where unemployment goes down and people have to work 2 jobs, where the people at Mar-a-Lago are holding a constant New Year's celebration because every day is a celebration there. But if you travel around the United States and see what's happening to working people, it's a disaster. And Mr. Trump's going to make it worse because he said the way he's paying for his tax cut to his friends at Mar-a-Lago and the big corporations is by cutting health care, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Those are things that absolutely cannot ever be considered. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to hurt working Americans across the board so the people at Mar-a-Lago can have a better New Year's Eve celebration.
Tom, you said the priority, you've been consistent about this, priority is beating Donald Trump come November, without a doubt. And you said you would support any of the other candidates. In other words, you believe it should be you think you have the best chance of beating him, but you'd support any of them. At the same time, how do you make a decision as you go through your strategy about how to really distinguish yourself from your rivals, your Democratic rivals, without reducing the chance they might ultimately win if, in fact, they got the nomination? You have an ad out right now, 60-second ad. This is only 15 seconds of it, but you push off of Joe Biden and you push off Pete Buttigieg pretty hard. Just play this 15 seconds.
If we don't do something different this time around, he'll win again. That's the hard truth. We simply can't afford to nominate another insider or an untested newcomer who doesn't have the experience to beat Trump on the economy. We need to think different.
So, Tom, in your own mind, as you show those images of Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, how do you trade off that delicate balance, really, about you need to establish why you're different from them, why you're a better candidate, without taking down their chances of prevailing in November if they should be the nominee?
Look, every single Democrat is better on every single policy area than Mr. Trump. I will support any Democrat, if it's not me, 100%. I don't think it's a secret that Joe Biden has been in Washington, D.C. for 50 years. I don't think I'm saying anything that's not true and that everybody doesn't already know. I don't think it's a secret that Pete Buttigieg is 38 years old. Everybody knows that. We have to ask ourselves as Democrats, how are we going to beat Donald Trump? Who can beat Donald Trump? Who can take him down on the economy? Has to happen. Who can pull together a diverse coalition and get people to the polls? Has to happen. I think we've got to confront that openly, and we can't pretend it's not true in hopes that we won't deal with the real issue and it will go away. It's not going away. That's the point of this week, David. We have to confront the fact that Mr. Trump can be reelected, that he is a dangerous and skillful demagogue, and that we're going to have to take him down on the debate stage, and we're going to have to convince diverse Americans across the country and across the board that this is the year that everybody has to show up together to beat this guy. That's the task. Let's deal with the truth here. Let's not pretend it's not true.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate you taking time. I know you're awfully busy getting ready for that debate tonight. Really appreciate it. That's Tom Steyer. He, of course, is a candidate for president. And we're going to have live coverage of that New Hampshire primary results starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. 7 of the Democratic candidates running for president will be on the debate stage tonight in Manchester, New Hampshire. And our own chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Cirilli, is going to be there. He comes to us now from the spin room at St. Anselm College, the scene of tonight's debate. So, Kevin, good to see you again. I like to see an ABC News logo there behind you. It brings back fond memories of my past. Give us a sense of what we're looking forward to on this debate stage tonight.
Well, I thought Tom Steyer, in that interview that you did that was so great, he really set the stage here because the attacks are sharpening between former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, yesterday I caught up with the press secretary to Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, and she raised the issue precisely about Pete Buttigieg's record as it relates to health care. So potential foreshadowing there for how that's going to play between Buttigieg and Sanders. Meanwhile, of course, former Vice President Joe Biden going to have to reset some of the momentum that he lost. Look for him to try to recapture that. His campaign actually took him off the trail today, David, in order to have debate prep for him. He's lost several news cycles as a result of all of the coverage of the debacle that was that Iowa caucus. And Senator Elizabeth Warren, how will she try to try to get some momentum in this debate as well? Look for her campaign to try to put forward a message of party unity.
Okay, thank you so very much to Kevin Cirilli. And be sure to tune in to a special installment of Sound On with Kevin Cirilli on Bloomberg Radio. That's going to be right after the debate tonight. To give us their views on what we're likely to see on the stage tonight, we welcome now Kirsten Hahn. She is Democratic strategist and senior advisor at ROKK Solutions, coming to us today from Washington, D.C., and from Philadelphia, the Reverend Joe Watkins. He is former aide to President George Herbert Walker Bush. So, Kirsten, thank you so much for being with us. I hate to not keep coming back to this, but how much of a factor will Iowa play on that debate stage tonight? We just have the Iowa State Party now saying, okay, you got more time to go back and appeal and think about this again. Tom Perez says maybe we recanvass. Can they get past Iowa and on to the next state?
I mean, I think the candidates are all going to be looking to get past Iowa. It was a huge debacle. It was so embarrassing for our party, honestly. So I think, whether you won or lost, I think all the candidates have a reason to look forward. I know that, Buttigieg, the mayor, is going to be probably talking about, his win there. I think most of the candidates are going to be looking forward. I'm really interested to see, it's interesting that, like Kevin said, you've got Senator Warren, who's talking about party unity, but then Senator Sanders, who's really throwing some sharp punches at Pete Buttigieg, somehow saying that he's in the hands of all the billionaires, which seems to be his only left hook at the mayor. But I think all the candidates will be looking to move forward because if we don't, who won the Iowa caucus, always say, is President Trump.
So, Joe, I'm really curious about Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden in this sense. Joe Biden clearly had a very disappointing, I think many people would say, Iowa caucus. Does he have to get second here? And if Pete Buttigieg edges him out, has he got a problem?
Well, it certainly doesn't help Joe Biden if he doesn't have a really strong showing in New Hampshire, so everybody's going to be watching. But again, you have to remember that New Hampshire, like Iowa, is not a terribly diverse state, and Joe Biden will more likely perform well in states that have diverse populations. So you would look to see him do well in a place like Nevada or a place like South Carolina that has a large African-American population. And that's what really matters, because Democrats know that in order to be really competitive in November, African-Americans have to show up to vote at the polls like they did for President Obama. And anything less than that is going to make it difficult for whoever the Democratic nominee is to win. So Joe Biden has to show well, certainly in Nevada and South Carolina. If he does reasonably well in New Hampshire, maybe better than he did in Iowa, he's not hurt too badly by that.
So, Kristen, I'm fascinated with this. We just had a discussion with Tom Steyer, who's running for president, and he really emphasized in both Nevada and South Carolina the minorities, the African Americans in South Carolina, the Hispanics in Nevada. And I'm struck by the fact that the tryout for the nomination for the Democrat candidate is different from that from the Republican, that you really need to appeal to those minority groups. Is that right? And who has the strongest case for that?
I think it's absolutely right. And, you know, the Democratic caucus, or the Democratic Party, for better or for worse, we are a very diverse caucus, unlike the Republican Party for the most part. So I think that you have to look forward to states that are more diverse than states like Iowa, New Hampshire. So I think it's smart to be looking beyond that. And I think that there's also, and I'm not saying this because I'm on Bloomberg television, but I was just out in Los Angeles and stopped by the Bloomberg headquarters. I have to say, like, he has got a very diverse, outreach program. I was, looking at his campaign strategy, the people he's got on the ground. It's very impressive, and I think we're not looking at him a lot right now because he's not on the debate stage. But I think it's really something to look at as you're looking at the diverse populations, like and where they're going to vote. Look at Joe Biden, but look at Mayor Bloomberg as well.
Well, Joe, I must say, in the State of the Union address with the president on Tuesday, he went out of his way to really mention African Americans and have them there as guests, refer to them, a number of prominent African Americans. What's the likelihood the president can reach out to the African American community? Let's be clear, he's not going to get a majority of that, I think it's fair to say. But even if he can move it 2, 3, 4 percentage points, it could make a difference.
You're absolutely right, David. I think that's the idea, which is the president is expected to get about 8, 9, 10% of the African-American vote. But if he can move the needle to about 14, 15%, 13%, somewhere in that arena, he's in great shape. And he's doing that. If you look at the commercial he ran during Super Bowl, very, very powerful commercial at Super Bowl where he had a black woman who had a life sentence, and she thanked President Trump for getting her out of prison, for changing the prison policy so that she could be free. The same is true with the optics at the State of the Union address. I mean, the outreach to blacks, giving that African American who was part of the Tuskegee Airmen, making him a general, giving that young girl an opportunity scholarship right there. All that's powerful for the viewing audience. And if you consider the fact that he was playing to the audience at large, the national audience, I think he succeeded.
So, Kristen, finally, it strikes me that we've talked about Nevada, but we didn't talk about the fact that it's a caucus state, which we just had one of, didn't go quite so well. How's the Democratic Party going to make sure that they don't have egg on their face a second time? Because that would be pretty ugly.
Well, it's so interesting that, you look at technology is what came in and kind of, that's how we got egg on our face. It was supposed to make it better. I remember the first time I went to a caucus in Iowa in 2004, and I kind of looked around, and it's, I do think that there's a way to preserve the caucus. It's an interesting thing. It gets people involved in the community. But, you got to look at how technology plays into the future of our elections and these caucuses. And it just underscores, how important it is that we secure our elections. As long as we take lessons from Iowa, we can't do that again.
Joe, those of us in the media love to really focus on the fiasco. I think it's fair to say that Iowa caucuses turned out. Does it really have any effect? I mean, I saw that President Trump's campaign manager right away came out and said they can't even run a caucus. Why would we trust them with their health care? I thought that was sort of clever. But does it potentially have any lasting effect that sort of tarnishes the Democratic Party a bit?
Well, it doesn't have a lasting effect, but it's certainly, the cumulative effect of a lot of slip-ups, it will hurt the Democratic Party. So this was a self-inflicted wound and a pretty bad one, given the fact that everybody was looking to the Iowa caucuses to get a sense of where the campaign might be headed, and to not be able to give an answer for 2 or 3 days after the caucus was a real self-inflicted wound. But in the long term, if they don't repeat that, it won't have a huge negative effect.
Okay, thanks so very much to Joe Watkins and Kristen Hahn. A disclaimer now, Michael R. Bloomberg is also seeking the Democratic presidential nomination, as we just talked about. Bloomberg is the founder and the majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg News. And tune in for our special coverage of the New Hampshire primary. That kicks off Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. In China, the death toll from the coronavirus has risen to about 636 people, and over 30,000 people are now infected. President Trump has praised his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping for strong leading the country's response to the threat. But no one seems certain as to where this is all going to lead to, or even whether the rate of growth has really slowed. I asked Larry Summers for his assessment about how this could affect the world.
The fact that this one has gone so far has to mean there's a substantial chance that it's the one for this half century or this century. And the events that take place that infrequently, the worst of them, kill a number of millions of people, and quite possibly as many as 10 million people. And they disrupt commerce and transportation and the ordinary doing of business, not for weeks, but for many months, or even a period approaching a year. So I'm not certainly confident that this is going to be a historic disaster, but I think there is a risk that we are still in the top of the second inning with respect to this tragedy.
That was part of my interview with Larry Summers. You can catch the full interview on Wall Street Week. That's going to be airing tonight at 6 p.m. on Bloomberg Television and Radio, and airing everywhere online. Coming up, Balance of Power continues on Bloomberg Radio. In our second hour, we're going to speak with Tom Peters. He's founder of UCampaign. Tom created the app that Senator Ted Cruz used in the Iowa caucus. This is to good effect. We're going to talk about what went wrong this time. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.